She was 22 years old, and everything she owned fit inside a flour sack she could carry with one hand. No family left, no roof to sleep under, no money except the $11.40 she'd earned helping a neighbor woman put up preserves for 3 weeks straight. And tucked at the very bottom of that sack, wrapped in a square of old canvas, was a hand plane. A wooden-bodied smoothing plane with an iron blade her teacher had sharpened so many times the steel was worn thin as a thumbnail. It was the only thing of his she had been allowed to keep. What the people of Cutter's Mill, Wyoming Territory did not know, what they could not have guessed, as they watched her drag a rotted barn door out of the brush and haul it up the hill on her own back, was that beneath these sagging floorboards of that abandoned homestead she'd bought salvage rights to lay a secret that would undo the most respected man in the county and give her back everything that had been stolen from her. Settle in close tonight. This is the story of Nell Voss. Nell had not been born to Wyoming. She came from Ohio, from a river town where the air was thick with mill smoke and the smell of wet clay, a place she remembered mostly in fragments, the sound of a dinner bell, a red-painted door, the particular weight of her mother's hand on her shoulder. Her parents had gone together in a single bad winter, a fever that moved through their neighborhood like a fire through dry grass, and Nell was 8 years old when she was put on a wagon, heading west to live with her mother's uncle, a dry goods merchant named Harlan Grouse, in the settlement of Cutter's Mill. Harlan Grouse was not a cruel man in any dramatic way. He was simply indifferent, the way a fence post is indifferent to the weather. She ate at his table. She slept in the lean-to behind the store. She swept and stocked and tallied figures and kept her mouth shut, and that was the shape of her life for the next 9 years. She learned to exist at the edges of rooms, to read people the way you read a sky before a storm. The small signs, the shifts in posture, the quality of silence. The one exception to this gray, practical life was August Fenner, the carpenter. August Fenner kept a shop at the north end of town, a low building with shavings always curling out from under the door, and the smell of cedar and linseed oil drifting into the street. He was a widower, 60 or so, with hands that seemed to belong to a much larger man, wide, scarred, impossibly capable. He had come to Wyoming from Vermont, and he brought with him a philosophy that he never stated outright but demonstrated every day in the way he worked. That a thing done honestly was worth doing slowly, and that wood, like people, would tell you its nature if you were patient enough to listen. Nell had started coming to his shop when she was 12, drawn first by the smell and then by the silence, the way the only sound was the whisper of a plane or the measured rap of a mallet. August Fenner noticed her standing in the doorway on the third day and simply handed her a piece of sandpaper and pointed at a chair leg that needed smoothing. He did not ask her name. He did not make a fuss. He just put her to work, and that, she understood later, was the highest form of welcome he knew. Over the years, he taught her everything. How to read the grain of wood before you cut it. How to sharpen a blade until it caught the light like still water. How to fit a joint so tight you couldn't slip a piece of paper between the surfaces. He taught her that a good piece of work was an argument. A silent, patient argument against all the disorder and cruelty in the world. He made her a smoothing plane when she was 16, forging the iron blade himself from an old wagon spring and fitting it into a body of bird's-eye maple he'd been saving for something worthy. It was the finest tool she had ever held. She kept it with her always after that. When August Fenner died of a stroke the winter she turned 22, the last person who had truly seen her was gone. The man who moved quickly to fill the vacuum was Aldous Crane. Aldous Crane was the county land commissioner, a position he had held for 11 years, by the grace of his own careful maneuvering and the short memories of the people around him. He was smooth in the way of men who have practiced smoothness. His manners were good, his suits were pressed, and he had a way of looking at you that made you feel he was paying careful attention, when in fact he was calculating. He was not a man you could accuse of anything easily. He worked in suggestion and implication and the slow drift of paperwork. Nell was not surprised when his clerk appeared at the carpenter's shop 3 days after August Fenner's burial. The clerk was a young man named Tully, pale and apologetic, who would not hold eye contact. He had a leather folder, and inside it a single document, a summary of outstanding debts owed by the estate of August Fenner to the county land office and to Crane's own lumber supply business. The figures were neat and specific and almost entirely invented. Lumber orders Nell knew August had paid in cash because she had carried the money herself. Fees for permits that did not exist. A loan with interest that had supposedly been outstanding for 4 years, of which August had never spoken a single word. The total came to a sum that could not be paid. At the bottom, in Aldous Crane's tidy hand, was the solution: the deed to the carpenter's shop and the lot it sat on, transferred in full settlement of the debt. She had 48 hours to vacate the premises. Nell read the document twice. She folded it carefully and set it on the workbench. She looked around the shop. The tools ranked on their hooks, the half-finished rocking chair in the corner, the stack of walnut blanks August had been seasoning for 2 years. And she did not weep. She had learned from watching men like Crane that weeping only confirmed what they already believed, that she was soft, temporary, and could be moved. She spent that day in her own kind of ceremony. She cleaned every surface in the shop. She sharpened the tools and hung them properly. She swept the shavings and burned them in the yard. A man from Crane's office came to inventory the assets, his eyes lingering on the good tools, the seasoned lumber, the large bench vise that had taken August 3 months to build. He offered her $22 for the lot of it. She took it without a word. She packed her flour sack with care: a change of clothes, a tin plate and a spoon, a small canvas roll of hand tools, chisels, a marking gauge, a folding rule that Tully's inventory had overlooked because she had put them in a crate under an old horse blanket before he arrived, and wrapped carefully in canvas at the bottom, the smoothing plane August had made for her. She walked out of the shop at dusk without looking back. The door she left unlocked. She owed them nothing, not even the dignity of a locked door. She walked south out of Cutter's Mill, away from the storefronts, and the church steeple, and the sound of Aldous Crane's voice, at the far end of the street, talking to someone about something that was no longer any of her concern. The road turned to a track, and the track thinned out into nothing, and she followed the long slope down into the river bottom, where the cottonwoods grew thick, and the ground was soft and dark. She found shelter that first night in an old stock shed that leaned against the hillside half a mile from the river. The roof was still sound enough. She made a fire in the ring of stones that someone had used before her, ate a cold biscuit she'd had in her pocket, and sat for a long time listening to the cottonwoods move in the dark. She did not feel sorry for herself. She had grown out of that particular luxury years ago. What she felt instead was the specific bracing quality of a situation with no good options. The kind of clarity that comes when everything soft has been stripped away and only the hard core of what you actually are remains. She thought of August Fenner. She thought about what he would say if he were here, and the answer came quickly. Because she knew him well enough, he would hand her a piece of work and point at a problem that needed solving. That was all he had ever done. That was all she needed. In the morning, she walked the river bottom looking for resources the way August had taught her to look at a new piece of wood. Not for what it was, but for what it could be. She found the homestead about a mile downstream. It sat on a slight rise above the floodplain, set back from the river, facing south. Once it had been a proper place, you could see the bones of ambition in it still. A 2-room cabin, a barn, a spring house, a root cellar cut into the hillside. Someone had put real work into this land and then left it or been driven from it. The cabin roof had caved in on one end. The barn had lost most of its siding to weather and scavengers. The spring house stood intact, which she noted with interest. The root cellar door was still on its hinges. It was abandoned, that she could see, but the timber frame of the barn was still standing. Solid, old-growth fir, and the cabin walls were sound below the collapsed roof section. The soil around the spring was dark and rich and wet. There was good firewood everywhere. To the people of Cutter's Mill, who occasionally rode the South Road and could see the old Pardo place, that was the name people still used for it. After the family who had homesteaded it 20 years back and then disappeared from the county, under circumstances nobody seemed to remember clearly. It was a landmark of failure, a cautionary tale, a place where the land had defeated someone and would defeat anyone who tried again. Nell Voss saw a shop. She walked every inch of the property that morning, running her hands over the timber frame the way August had taught her to evaluate a joint. She checked the sill plates and found them sound under the barn. She looked at the spring and tasted the water. She examined the root cellar and found it dry and cool with solid stone walls. She stood in the middle of the barn and looked up at the frame above her and saw, with the practiced eye August had spent years training, that the structure was good. Whoever had built this barn had known what they were doing. The following morning she walked back to Cutter's Mill and went directly to the county recorder's office, a small room at the back of the courthouse. She waited until the clerk appeared and then stated her business simply. She wanted to purchase the salvage rights to the abandoned Pardo property on the South River Road. The clerk looked at her with the particular expression men reserved for young women who appeared to be serious about something inconvenient. He checked his ledgers. The property had been in county possession for 11 years, unclaimed and unpaid on. The salvage rights to the structures and materials could be purchased for $15. Nell laid $15 on the counter from the $22 she had been paid for August's tools. The clerk wrote out the paperwork, and she signed her name to it, and walked out with a document that gave her the legal right to everything standing on the Pardo place. She was down to $7. She had invested everything she had in a ruin that the county had not been able to give away in 11 years. She was all in. The work started at first light the next day, and did not stop until it was too dark to see. She began with the root cellar, cleaning it out, checking the drainage, making a list of what could be stored there. She took the collapsed section of the cabin roof apart carefully, salvaging every beam she could, setting aside the damaged ones for firewood and the sound ones in a pile. She was not in a hurry. She worked the way August had taught her, methodically, without wasted motion, reading each problem before she moved on it. People from town rode past on the south road. A few of them stopped. "That's the Pardo place," one man called out from his horse as if she might not have noticed. "Nothing ever takes up there. Spring floods it every 3 years." She did not respond. She was fitting a salvaged beam into a new position in the roof frame, and her attention was on the joint, not on him. A woman in a wagon slowed and watched her for a while. "What are you building?" she finally asked. "A floor first," Nell said. "Then a roof. Then everything else." The woman shook her head slowly and drove on. What happened next was the thing nobody in Cutter's Mill could explain later, when they were trying to account for how the day had gone the way it did. Nell had been pulling up the old floorboards in the cabin. The floor had been set directly on the ground, which was never right, and she wanted to raise it on piers to get it out of the damp. When she noticed something that stopped her hands mid-motion, the floorboards in the front room were standard rough-cut pine, the kind you'd expect in a frontier cabin. But the floorboards in the back room were different, thicker, more precisely cut, fitted together with a tightness that was not consistent with the rest of the construction. She had been around enough good woodwork to know when she was looking at a different level of craftsmanship, and this back floor was the work of someone else. Someone more skilled, or with a different purpose. She tapped along the boards with her knuckles, listening. August had taught her that trick. "Every hollow space has a voice," he used to say, "if you know how to ask." Near the back wall, behind where the iron stove had once stood, the sound changed. Hollow, deliberate. She took the claw of her hammer and worked the seam between two boards, feeling for give. What she found was not a gap but a fitted edge. A hinge, hidden flush with the surface, invisible unless you were looking for it. She found the corresponding latch on the opposite side, a small iron catch set into a routed groove, and when she pressed it, a section of the floor approximately 3 feet square lifted cleanly on a pivot. She went very still. Beneath the floor was a compartment, dug into the earth and lined with flat stones fitted together dry, like a root cellar in miniature. It was dry inside. A good builder had put this here. Someone who understood drainage and moisture. Someone who needed something kept safe and hidden for a long time. Inside the compartment were 3 things. The first was a tin lockbox, small and heavy, stamped with the name of a bank in Cheyenne. The second was a rolled oilcloth bundle tied with wire. The third was a leather notebook, its cover swollen and warped from old damp but its pages still legible. The ink faded to brown but readable. Nell sat back on her heels for a moment, her heart loud in the silence of the empty cabin. She reached for the notebook first. The handwriting inside was small and very neat, the handwriting of a person who had learned to write carefully because paper was expensive. The name on the inside cover was Elspeth Pardo. The dates ran from 12 years back to 11 years, and 2 months back, and they stopped abruptly. The last entries were the ones that changed everything. Elspeth Pardo had been the wife of Cason Pardo, the original homesteader. They had come from Missouri with their 2 children, had broken this land, had built this cabin and this barn, and this root cellar, and the spring house, had worked it for 9 years, and turned it from raw ground into a functioning farm. And then, in the final pages of the notebook, in handwriting that pressed harder into the paper. As the entries went on, Elspeth Pardo had recorded what happened to them. Aldous Crane had been the county land commissioner for 2 years when the Pardos arrived. He had taken note of the South River property immediately because the spring made it the best water source in the valley, and he had spent the following years looking for a way to obtain it. He found his way through a tax assessment. He had the Pardo property reassessed at a value 3 times its actual worth, creating a tax burden the family could not meet, and when they fell behind, he had moved to collect, not through the county, which would have required public process, but through a private arrangement that he had structured carefully to look legal from a distance. The Pardos had been given 30 days to pay an amount that could not be paid. When they could not pay it, Aldous Crane had taken the deed. He had done this before. Elspeth wrote in her last entry, "We are not the first. There is a man named Cutter who lost his mill property the same way 4 years ago, and a widow on the East Road who lost her farm, and others we have heard of but cannot name. He will do it again after us. What I am leaving here is proof. The tax assessments, the original deed, a letter from the county assessor, a different assessor, an honest one Crane dismissed from his position afterward, stating that the assessment was fraudulent. I am leaving these here because I do not know who else to trust, and because I believe that one day someone will find this place who knows what to do with what is inside it." Her last line read, "I hope they come before he takes the spring house too." Nell sat on the cold stone floor of the cabin, for a long time the notebook open in her lap. She understood now why the barn had been built so well, why the spring house still stood, why the root cellar was still sound. These people had been good builders and good farmers, and they had been driven out by the same man who had just driven her out. Using the same method, honed over more than a decade, she reached for the tin lockbox. It was locked, but the mechanism was simple. She used a chisel and a piece of wire and had it open in less than a minute. Inside were the documents Elspeth had described. The original Pardo deed with the county seal still intact, the fraudulent tax assessment, and a 3-page letter from a man named Howell, formerly the county assessor, dated 10 years back, laying out in plain and specific language exactly how Aldous Crane had manufactured the inflated valuation and what his purpose was. She unrolled the oilcloth bundle last. Inside was cash, $46 in paper and coin, old but usable, the Pardo family's savings that they had apparently hidden here before they left, either forgotten in the chaos of their departure or deliberately left as part of what Elspeth intended someone to find. Nell rewrapped the oilcloth carefully. She closed the notebook and set it on top of the lockbox. She looked at the open compartment in the floor for a long moment. She understood clearly what this was and what it meant. The documents alone were enough to end Aldous Crane's career and likely put him in front of a judge. The letter from the former assessor was the kind of evidence that did not go away when you wished it would. She was now in possession of things that a man with 11 years of practice in removing inconvenient obstacles would very much want to take from her. She closed the compartment and put the floorboard back. That evening, she did not go back to the stock shed. She stayed in the root cellar of the homestead, which was dry and warm enough and had a solid door she could bar from the inside. She worked by candlelight, laying the documents out on the stone floor and reading them through again, carefully, the way August had taught her to read a piece of work, looking for what was actually there, not what you expected or hoped to find. By the time the candle had burned halfway down, she knew what she needed. She needed someone outside Aldous Crane's circle. In a county where he had held his position for 11 years, that circle was wide. She spent a long time thinking about who was outside it. She thought of Vera Oakes, the woman who ran the post office in Cutter's Mill. Vera was a federal appointee. Her position came from Washington, not from the county commission, and she was the kind of woman who had outlasted 4 county commissioners and 3 sheriffs by the simple method of knowing more about everyone's business than they knew about hers, and keeping her own counsel absolutely. Nell had delivered parcels to Vera's window for 3 years, running errands for August. And in that time, the older woman had spoken to her exactly the way August had. Directly, without condescension, as if she assumed Nell was capable of understanding plain language and acting on it. More to the point, Vera Oakes received the federal mail, which meant she had a direct line to the Territorial Land Office in Cheyenne, which was not under Aldous Crane's authority. The next morning, before Cutter's Mill was fully awake, Nell walked to the post office and knocked on the back door. Vera Oakes opened it in her dressing robe, a cup of coffee in one hand, her expression suggesting she was not particularly surprised by anything at this hour. She looked at Nell, took in the flour sack over her shoulder and the set of her jaw, and said, "You'd better come in." Nell laid the documents on Vera's kitchen table and explained what she had found and where she had found it and what she believed it meant. She spoke in plain, clear sentences, the way August had always spoken, without performance or decoration. Vera read every page, her expression unchanging, her coffee going cold. When she finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Elspeth Pardo," she said finally. "I wondered what happened to her." She knew the family. She had processed their mail for 3 years. She said this as if it settled something in her, some long-standing question she had not known how to answer. "I can send this to the Territorial Land Office in the federal pouch," she said. "It goes out tomorrow morning. Crane can't touch it once it's in the federal system. They'll send an investigator." "How long?" Nell asked. "If they take it seriously." 2 weeks, 3 at the outside. Vera looked at her steadily. "You need to stay out of his way in the meantime." "I have salvage rights to the Pardo property," Nell said. "I'll stay there." Vera nodded slowly. "Good, do your work. Let me do mine." She took the documents, every one of them, and made Nell a written receipt listing each item. It was the act of a woman who understood that paper was the only thing between intention and proof. Nell walked back out into the early morning and went back to the river bottom and picked up her tools and went to work. She did not hide, exactly, but she was careful. She worked during daylight and slept in the root cellar at night with the door barred. She used the Pardo family's $46 carefully. A visit to the mill in the next county for new lumber for the cabin roof, a bag of nails, a quart of linseed oil. She was not extravagant. She had enough to do the work that needed doing, and so she did it. Word traveled, as it does in small places. The story of the girl who had bought salvage rights to the Pardo place and was up there alone doing the work. It moved through Cutter's Mill the way stories do, picking up additions and corrections as it went. A farmer named Burl Staves, who had his own reasons for disliking Aldous Crane and had been quiet about them for years, sent his teenage son down the south road with a load of creek gravel for the drainage work she was doing around the cabin foundation. He didn't come himself. He just sent the gravel and the boy to dump it where she directed. She thanked the boy, and the next week left a set of new cabinet hinges she had made from scrap iron at Staves's gate with no note attached. A woman named Celia Dodd, who kept a farm on the East Road and had never spoken to Nell in her life, appeared one afternoon with a pot of beans and cornbread. She set it on the newly repaired step of the cabin and said, "That's a good door you put on," and then she left. It was the whole of what she said. These were the first true threads of belonging Nell had ever felt. Not in speech, but in the old frontier language of practical kindness, in the specific grammar of people who help each other, because the work is real and the need is real, and there is no other logic required. The territorial investigator arrived on a Thursday, 18 days after Vera Oakes's packet went out in the federal pouch. He was a compact, efficient-looking man named Granger, with a briefcase and a manner that was neither friendly nor unfriendly. Simply professional, the way a good tool is simply designed for its purpose. He went first to the post office, then to the courthouse, and then, late that afternoon, he came down the south road to the Pardo property, where Nell was fitting new window frames into the repaired cabin wall. She showed him the compartment. She showed him where she had found it, and how. He examined the false floor with quiet attention, running his hands along the fitted edges the way a carpenter checks a joint, and she saw in that gesture the same instinct August had tried to teach her. The instinct for truth in the physical world. The way a good piece of work cannot pretend to be something it isn't. "You found this yourself," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I was pulling up the old floor to relay it on piers," she said. "I heard the hollow when I tapped." He wrote this down. He asked her to walk him through everything in order, and she did, without embellishment. He was there for 2 hours. When he left, he shook her hand, which surprised her. What happened in Cutter's Mill in the following week happened in the way of official business, without drama, without public theater, but with a finality that everyone in the county felt. The county commission was notified of a federal investigation into the land records. Aldous Crane was summoned to the territorial capital for what was described officially as a review of land administration practices. He went quietly, in the gray light of an early morning, in a buggy with 2 men from the territorial marshal's office. His assistant, Tully, was waiting at the courthouse when the commission opened the records room and stood white-faced in the doorway while 2 federal clerks began going through 11 years of files. The news reached Cutter's Mill in pieces over the following days. The nature of Crane's methods became visible as the records were examined. The Pardo family was not the only one. There were 6 other properties in the county that had transferred to Crane or to companies he controlled through the same mechanism of inflated assessment and manufactured debt. The full scope of it, when it came out, was larger than even Elspeth Pardo's notebook had recorded. The Pardo deed, once examined by the territorial court, was found to have been improperly transferred. Under the legal standard for fraudulent conveyance, the property reverted to the heirs of the original owners, and in the absence of the Pardo family, who could not be located, Nell Voss was found to have a valid claim as the legal salvage holder and the person who had restored value to the abandoned land. After 4 months of correspondence that Vera Oakes helped her navigate, Nell received a deed. It was a Tuesday morning when the county clerk brought it out to the property himself, because Vera had apparently made clear that it was the appropriate thing to do. He was a different clerk than Tully, who had quietly resigned in November. This one was a young man who seemed genuinely nervous, and he handed her the document with both hands and a slightly formal expression, as if he understood that the occasion required some gravity. Nell stood in the doorway of the cabin she had rebuilt, the roof tight, the floor level and dry, the new windows fitted clean and square, and she read her name on the deed twice. She folded it with care and tucked it inside her shirt. "Thank you," she said. The clerk nodded and left, and she stood for a moment in the morning quiet. The cabin behind her smelled of fresh-cut lumber and linseed oil. On the workbench inside, her tools were laid out in the order August Fenner had taught her. Marking tools, then cutting tools, then planes, then chisels, from largest to smallest. A system that was not about neatness but about the logic of work, about moving through a problem in the right sequence. In the center of the bench, where the light from the new window fell best, sat the smoothing plane he had made for her. Its maple body had darkened with use and handling until it glowed like old honey. Its blade, which she sharpened every evening because that was what he had taught her, caught the morning light and threw it back. She thought about Elspeth Pardo, who had built this compartment and left her evidence in it and trusted that someone would find it and know what to do. She thought about what kind of faith that required. To build something careful and precise in the middle of the worst thing that had ever happened to you, believing that the work would outlast the crisis, that someone unknown would come along and pick it up and carry it forward. She thought about August, who had handed a 12-year-old girl a piece of sandpaper and a chair leg, and never once suggested she was anything other than capable. She thought about all of it for a moment, and then she picked up her plane and went to work. Within the year, people had begun calling her the best Finnish carpenter in the county, which was a title she did not seek and did not argue with. She did good work. She did honest work. When someone brought her a broken piece of furniture, or a door that wouldn't hang, or a window that let in the cold, she fixed it the way August had fixed things. Quietly, thoroughly, without making the person feel embarrassed for having needed the help. The shop she built in the barn, that first summer, became the place people came to when they wanted something done right. Not quickly, not cheaply, but right. Children from the surrounding farms sometimes appeared at the barn door and stood watching the way she had once stood in August Fenner's doorway. She always put them to work. That is how things spread, she had come to understand, not by announcement, but by demonstration. Not by claiming a place, but by doing the work that makes a place possible. The land does not care what you call yourself. The wood does not care what you have been through. The joint is either true or it isn't, and if it is, the thing you've built will stand. Nell Voss was 22 years old, and she had been put out of the only home she'd ever known with $11 and the clothes on her back. She'd spent 15 of those dollars on salvage rights to a ruin that had defeated everyone who tried it before her. And what she found beneath that floor was not luck. It was the record of another woman's suffering, kept carefully against the day when it might do some good. We think about that sometimes. About the kind of courage it takes to build something careful and true when the world is falling apart around you. To believe that the work matters even when you can't see who it will reach. She was no longer the girl without a door to go back to. She was Nell Voss, the carpenter of the Pardo place, and the whole county knew her name. Tonight's question for you: have you ever found something that someone else had left behind? Something that turned out to matter more than they could have known? Leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. We read everyone.